But next up, I'd like to welcome up our next two guests, Hank from Mechanism and Bowtied Mooneeb, to talk to us a little bit about pool parties. With a bow tie on himself, look at this. Hank, it's a pleasure.
Thanks, Kyle.
Looking
nice to meet
sharp.
You,
Hello, everybody. Hello. Yep, seems to be working. Cool. Yeah, so I thought first maybe we just introduce ourselves. This is Bowtied Mooneeb, everyone. If you see him around, the Bowtied helps.
Yep. I am Bowtied Mooneeb, CEO of Syvita Mining. We are a holistic city coins portfolio management platform, and we've deployed over 4 million stacks into mining both Miami coin and New York City coin. So,
thank you.
Hank, it's a pleasure to be on stage with you, man.
Absolutely. I'm Hank. I'm a developer, co-founder at Mechanism. We help teams build out their products in the Stacks ecosystem, whether it's sort of tokenomics or mechanism design. That's kind of the thing we love. And so today we're going to be talking about stacking, which to me is, I think, one of the biggest inspirations for just the opportunity space around stacks. So yeah, I'm excited to get into that. Yeah, I guess, would you like to give a quick introduction of what stacking is, and then we can kind of go into?
So my very naive, when I first got into the Stacks ecosystem, I was like, oh, okay, well, stacking is a mechanism by which you give up Stacks liquidity in exchange for a Bitcoin yield. That's a very naive explanation of what stacking is. In reality, stacking is a core and essential component of the Stacks consensus like algorithm, right? So through stacking, you signal a Bitcoin address that is included in the reward set for the Stacks consensus algorithm. You also specify how many stacks you want to lock up for how many reward cycles, and you're also specifying support for a particular chain tip. So it's a very core important feature of the Stacks consensus algorithm.
Yeah. I was just looking up some stats this morning, and I guess it's 1,500 Bitcoin have been paid out to stackers since this mechanism launched in January of last year, which is like $70 million in today's price. It's really just kind of incredible. Yeah, I'm curious what your first reaction was to stacking. For me, I was on the Hero team as we launched Stacks 2.0, but not on the blockchain team, and so I was kind of helping with integrations like on the wallet side, but I certainly wasn't an expert. And then it was when I first sort of put Stacks in, and it just ended, some Bitcoin showed up in my address. It really kind of blew my mind, and there were so many reactions in that first stacking cycle of like people posting their screenshots, their notifications. I don't know, do you remember any first reactions like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember thinking like this is probably the most amazing thing I've ever seen, right? And you lock up some stacks that, like on the surface, like to you seems like it doesn't have anything to do with Bitcoin, and you earn a yield in Bitcoin on a bi-weekly basis, like every 2 weeks. I mean, that's pretty incredible technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we have a lot of opportunities for you to stack your stacks. There's sort of like a native integration that we've had since day one in the Stacks or the Hero wallet, and now there's a lot of really great pools to help you. We've got Cat in the back with experts that helps with that, and a lot of different companies. But what I'm excited about is like the future thing of applications that can be built on top of stacking that can sort of utilize it as the base layer, sort of a yield generating mechanism for stacks. What kind of excites you about like future applications that utilize stacking? Yeah.
Sure. I think, is it Sigil or Sigil? I never know how to pronounce it, but I remember that they had proposed a mechanism where you would subscribe to somebody's blog or something like that, and the way you would do that is by stacking stacks and delegating them to that blogger on their behalf. And so I think that's like an incredible thing, right? Because you can effectively send your yield to somebody else. Yeah. That really excites me. And then I think there's a lot of opportunity for creating platforms where that stacking yield becomes like collateral, right? And you are able to take that stacking yield and maybe like build like futures contracts around it or something and sell it off in the future. And that creates a lot of additional flexibility for financing within the Stacks ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was one thing I was thinking about as sort of prepping for this is when you try and answer that, what are the future applications question, yeah, you could bucket into like, where do you even just send the rewards or what do you do with that? And so, yeah, I think Sigel's really an awesome, I think, idea of sort of like a membership-based type of thing where what's so cool is just that you can contribute to a creator or whoever it is, and you're not actually even paying anything. You're forfeiting some future yield maybe for the time being, but it's kind of a win-win, I think, across the board. And you're able to contribute Bitcoin itself, layer 1 Bitcoin, to this individual or entity. It's your principal is never on risk, right? Yeah.
So you don't ever have to worry about getting slashed or losing the stacks that you've stacked or something like that. And now that you mention it, like just the idea of like stacking clubs, right? Like stacking for a cause, whether it's a charitable cause or if it's to pay for the open bar.
Yep. I've heard people talking about trying to get involved with musicians to do a similar thing. Charities, I think, are a really cool idea. Like you could stack, direct some of the yield to maybe Coin Center or whatever charitable cause, and maybe get an NFT out of it. I don't know, a very sort of cyclical, beneficial thing. I mean, we just had Patrick talking about city coins, and it's just a brilliant way that they took the same sort of mechanism design, called a POX Lite, and now they're funding cities. They're funding Miami to do some really great things. So absolutely, yeah. Another, sort of the flip side of stacking. Stacking is like for sort of the consumer-facing angle, or for Stacks holders itself. You lock it up, you earn some Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin comes from miners, and sort of core, proof of transfer. It's Stacks miners are sending the Bitcoin to stackers in order to create new blocks, ensure the security of the network, and that gives yield to the stackers. And then in city coins, which you're very involved with, it's the same mechanism, but you're actually spending stacks to contribute to city coins holders. And so Bowtied Mooneeb is very involved in mining pools. Syvita Mining, that's kind of their specialty. And so I'm curious, how do you think about mining, especially when it comes to sort of optimal strategies and sort of the future of POX-based mining?
Sure. So you want me to give up the secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
It's actually really simple. If you do the like the data analysis, and it's really not that complicated, what you find is that the optimal mining strategy is to bid as low as possible across as many blocks as possible. There's like nuances to that, right? Like if you have a falling price of whatever token it is you're mining, it makes more sense to kind of like backweight your bids, right? So bid less up front, bid more on toward like the tail end of your mine mini or whatever it is. And then if the price is like trending up, then you probably want to bid heavier earlier, get it cheaper now because it might not be as cheap in the future. So that's kind of like the ideal strategy. And then, I believe that probably the proof of transfer mechanism, Citycoins is like the first implementation of proof of transfer light, right? Where you've taken the Stacks consensus algorithm, proof of transfer, and you've extended it and modified it in a way that's like, you're not necessarily like settling blocks on the blockchain or something like that, but it's just a funding mechanism. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, like Citycoins is, and we've talked about this. We had this the Twitter space not that long ago. We were talking about, is there a way that you could do like proportional rewards or something like that? And so I think there's so many different potential constructs for what proof of transfer light could look like that we've barely even scratched the surface, right?
Yeah. You were kind of getting into that with sort of what do you do with the proceeds of mining, and that's a question that I really don't know the answer to. And it's interesting with POX because that's sort of true with all mining. Should you reinvest rewards? Should you just hold sort of the rewards itself? But then now you have this stacking aspect where you can get the rewards and then stack it and sort of earn future rewards. And so how do you think about that? Whether it's sort of from Bitcoin to Stacks or from Stacks to Citycoins, you could complete the loop, you know, and kind of go in a full circle. You could go in sort of just one direction.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a great question. So I personally, I like to stack with Friedger pool, just because I want, first off, like, you want to be able to stack, you know, like at least a certain number of slots. Otherwise, you run the risk of not getting like the expected yield on your, like the expected yield on your stacks. So like if you only stacked one slot, potentially that slot could be part of like or the Bitcoin rewards that go to that slot could be like part of a flash block.
Right.
In which case you may not get like the full Bitcoin reward, right? So by stacking with a pool, you kind of mitigate that risk. What was that question that you asked? I'm sorry.
Well, and yeah, whether you stack your mining rewards.
Okay. So with the reward, the reason I like to stack with Friedger pool is because Friedger on the back end, he's selling the Bitcoin, exchanging it to Stacks, and in the long run, you know, Stacks being like a $2 billion market cap project, I believe it has a lot more upside relative to like Bitcoin, right? Which is a $1 trillion token, right? I mean, Bitcoin could do 10x, but going from 1 trillion to 10 trillion, that's a huge move. That takes a lot of capital, a lot of adoption, whereas Stacks going from 2 billion to say like 100 billion, like probably a little bit easier, right? So I personally like to take that yield and go full circle, go back into the token that I'm mining. And then same with Citycoins. With Citycoins, I would say I've like de-risked a bit, right? So one of the benefits of you know, stacking and mining early on during like the bonus period of mining rewards is that you can really quickly recoup the cost of your cost basis of like mining stacks, and in that way like de-risk your investment. So personally, like I've just maintained the stacks that I've received from mining Citycoins.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm still like I haven't sold any Citycoins.
Yeah.
Very bullish on Citycoins.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. It is nice that you don't have to make that decision really necessarily. It's sort of win-win across the board. Yeah.
It's like an active management thing, right? Like if I wanted to reinvest into Citycoins, that would be like an extra step, right?
Right. Yeah. Back to sort of mining, you've built Syvita Mining, which, as someone who's dabbled with and learning how to mine Citycoins, there's a lot of complications around trying to calculate sort of the perfect strategy, and it was no surprise to me to see that mining pools popped up quite early on, because it really is, I think, financially for the majority of people the right way to do it. What challenges do you see as sort of with mining, especially on Citycoins today, and what are maybe some strategies to mitigate that?
Yeah, I think the challenges really revolve around education. It's not immediately obvious what stacking is, what the Stacks consensus algorithm, like how that works, what proof of transfer light is, and there's not a lot of great resources that are out there for explaining that. So in terms of like things that we can do to improve that, I think is just like content, right? Just more educational content. And at Syvita Mining, we are incredibly busy, but we are working on improving our landing page to help educate people on what mining is, how to get involved.
That's great.
And how just like simplify that for the retail user, right?
Yeah. I would wonder also, today when I look at Syvita Mining's app, it's sort of bucketed into various groups of blocks, which makes perfect sense, sort of given the way the contract is designed. But do you foresee a future where you could build even sort of derivatives, kind of getting back into this financialization, where it could be more of maybe it's a single asset that sort of represents long-term rewards?
Absolutely. I do believe we've talked about it numerous times. I think it can get pretty complicated in that, let's say you wanted to stack your Citycoins for 4 cycles, right? The derivative token that would represent that would be different than the derivative token. It would have to be different than the derivative token of Citycoins locked for, say, 5 cycles, right? So that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge maybe best solved directly through the Citycoins contracts, as opposed to building something on top of it.
Right.
But that's definitely something I think that as Citycoins evolves will probably be explored more and more.
Yeah. That's why I'm excited about Citycoins too, the Citycoins DAO, Because yeah, the way it was designed first, it makes perfect sense. It follows the POX mechanism, almost to the T. But we're all learning sort of how this thing works in the real world, and so having some sort of upgradability or just governance layer to sort of tweak mechanisms here and there, it'll just make it all a lot better. Be able to move faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I also, like, you work with Matty Stacks, who seems to be a really brilliant mind in sort of the financialization layer. I'm curious when we'll maybe see some of these financial products that you were kind of talking about in the beginning of, maybe it's like fixed rate interest swaps or futures. Do you see that as something that's kind of maybe right around the corner, something that's maybe more of an adoption type thing? It's also more complicated, and so it's questions of user demand for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be driven by user demand, right? So, I don't see a lot of scenarios right now where somebody may have a desire to lock their tokens and then sell that forward, right? I could see that, maybe when there are like multiple mining pools or like large institutional investors that maybe they want, the stacking yield from stacking city coins because it's really high, but they don't want the actual city coins risk, so they sell the unlock, they sell that forward or something like that. Yeah. But I think for your everyday, I think for at the moment, like there probably aren't that many institutions that are mining city coins. It's probably primarily retail. And I don't think that there's a lot of retail demand for those kinds of products at the moment, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe eventually as retail investors become more sophisticated and more, maybe there's like a higher demand for that kind of product, but for the time being, probably not so much.
Yeah. When I think about stacking, and it's hard to sort of calculate what your sort of expected future rewards would be because these prices vary, but it's all built on this base amount of 1,000 stacks as the block reward. And so roughly there's 1,000 stacks worth of Bitcoin spent per block on stacking. And with 2 slots per block, that's kind of like each stacking slot will earn about 500 stacks worth of Bitcoin. And so if you sort of take that analogy and bring it further, I've wondered, like myself, I've thought, I'd probably like to participate in a contract where I've got stacks and maybe someone would essentially maybe pay me up front for all that future yield, maybe even in the form of stacks. And I still don't know exactly sort of, what that play looks like in terms of, is that a hedge? Is that is that sort of a future?
That's like a really interesting concept. I believe there was an attempt to do that by, I think it was like Neptune Wallet or something like that. Like they were going to pay you up front for the yield on whatever you stacked, and then they would take the risk on the back end, right? So if like it wasn't, if you didn't quite reach the yield that they paid you, then they would take a loss, or if you earned more. There's definitely probably a market for that product. I could totally see that. I do think that the haircut that you would take on that yield, right? So let's say you expected to get a million satoshis of yield for your stacking, right? That's probably going to take like a 20% haircut, right? Because of the potential volatility of both stacks and Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then that sort of touches on what I've always thought of as sort of the holy grail of stacking that people have kind of asked for since it first sort of came out, which is how can a Bitcoin holder earn stacking yield from stacks, or earn Bitcoin yield from stacking? And there's something to figure out, because ultimately there has to be stacks locked up. But to me, if we could sort of solve that in a way that's sort of price hedged, it could be one of the biggest sort of user adoption mechanisms for stacks as a whole. I haven't really given that much thought out, to be completely honest, but yeah, I could see a situation where maybe you post Bitcoin as collateral, somebody on the stack side posts stacks as collateral and stacks it, and then all of a sudden you've got this yield. And for using that Bitcoin collateral, you get paid that Bitcoin yield, right, or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
I absolutely hope to see something like that built out in the near future. That would be amazing.
Yeah, maybe sort of a lending protocol type of thing where there's some sort of interest paid on the borrower side, but the stacks are being stacked as well.
Right.
Yeah, especially if it allows sort of leverage stacking. I don't know. It's like whenever you get into these conversations, it does kind of go
I know,
on
right?
and on.
Well, it's still very much like a greenfield space, right? There's so much to explore and so many different directions that we could go with all of these things, right? And I think it's unclear what like where the market demand is at the moment, but I think that as the Stacks ecosystem grows, we'll get there, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's it for us, but thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bowtied Mooneeb. This was fun.
Thanks, Hank. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was good.